Hello everyone, this is Logan59XP here, and today we are here to talk about the Nintendo Switch 2 1 year later. Because that's right, my friends, your eyes are not deceiving you. You see that calendar date. It is June 5th, 2026. Exactly 1 year ago today, both the Switch 2 and Mario Kart World graced our screens, and I figured, why not take this opportunity to look back at the Switch 2's journey so far? Because it's definitely been a lot more eventful, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much. A lot more than I think I was expecting. Like, I thought going into this generation, this was going to be a pretty safe, simple, easy win for them, right? The Switch 1 was insanely successful, right? Absolutely destroying its predecessor in the Wii U in terms of sales, going from their least successful console ever to their most successful console ever. A feat that will probably never be replicated ever again. I mean, I don't think anyone was ever expecting the Switch 2 to even come close to the Switch 1 sales, but I'm telling you right now, it's not going to. But it's still going to do well, to be clear, but it's definitely not going to come anywhere near the 155 million of the Switch 1. I mean, that's an achievement that very few other consoles have been able to hit. The only other console left, the only one left that the Switch 1 is yet to beat is, of course, famously the PS2. I know people have very strong opinions on whether or not the 160 million units shipped or sold or whatever that Sony put out a few years ago. I know people have very strong opinions on whether or not that's a real number or if they just pulled it out of their ass because they're like, oh shoot, they're about to beat us or whatever. I know I don't really have a stake in that. If it beat, if the Switch 1 beats the PS2, cool. If it doesn't, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But the fact that it's that close says something. The fact that it's made it that far says something. Coming from the brink with the failure of the Wii U. And as much as I'm sure a lot of us, especially looking back on it, really do like the Wii U, despite its faults, there were some great games on the Wii U. I have a lot of fond memories on the Wii U and the Wii U era of Nintendo just in general, Reggie, Iwata, the skits, various other things, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. But despite the pros of the Wii U 3DS era that we look back fondly on, it is objectively true. The Wii U flopped. No one bought it. The only people that bought a Wii U were kids and hardcores. That was it. That was the audience of the Wii U. Right? And that might have been me or you, but not much else, right? We all know how that story went. I'm not going to recap the entire Wii U saga. That could be, again, a video for another day. Maybe we can look back on the Wii U at some point. I was thinking a few years ago when the Wii U turned 10 that we could do a retrospective back then, but of course it never happened. But again, that's a story for another time. However, coming off of the brink of not only the massive loss of Iwata, which is obviously a big hit to the company, but also just the failure of the Wii U in general, despite some very solid titles in its in kind of halfways in. Like, I think one of the, again, we're not going to harp on this too much, but if you were to ask me what is the number one reason why the Wii U failed, it's not the name, it's not the marketing, it's not any of that. No, you want to know the number one reason why it failed? They took too long to get a top tier game out the door. In my opinion, the first truly blockbuster big, flagship title that would actually sell consoles was Mario Kart 8. And it took them a year and a half to get that out the door. Compare that to the Switch 1, which had Breath of the freaking Wild at launch, or the Switch 2 that had Mario Kart at launch. And say what you love Mario Kart World, but it's a new Mario Kart game at launch. You can't argue with that. So it just kind of goes to show how far we've come. Like, they really have understood that you got to have at least one big game out the gate, and then you have to have you got to have a lineup ready to go in the months following. You can't just have the one game and then have nothing for months on end. You got to have a constant stream of content, and that's something that they nailed in 2017. And in my opinion, while obviously not nearly as strong, The lineup so far has been pretty consistent. Even if we haven't had a truly big game in a while, they've been putting out games. So they have definitely learned their lesson from the Wii U, because man, back in the day, though, it felt like the Wii U took forever to get big games. Like the wait for Mario Kart 8 and Smash Wii U back in the day felt like 5 years. Now, that obviously a big reason for that is because I was younger back then. Time moved way slower back then, because that's how our brains work, where when you're younger, each year feels like this monumental, life-changing part of your life, whereas nowadays, a year passes and it's like nothing. It's weird how our brains work. But again, we're harping on the Wii U here, even though we're supposed to be talking about the Switch too. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because it shows how big, despite the fact that, yes, we had Mario Kart 8 and Smash Wii U and Splatoon 1 and Xenoblade X and a couple of other notable titles, the console just didn't sell. And by the time it started to kind of move, it was too late. Because by the time we had the double whammy of Mario Kart 8 and Smash Wii U, which were the two big flagship titles of the system, at that point in time at least, only a few months after Smash Wii U came out, Iwata announced the deal with DNA for the mobile stuff, and famously announced the NX, which at the time they sweared unto God was not a replacement for the Wii U, even though we all knew that it was the Wii U replacement, in the same way that back in the day they famously said that the DS was the third pillar and the GBA was still going to exist and the GameCube was still going to exist, and it was just like, nope, this is that all over again. We all know the Wii U hasn't done very well. We know that the NX is the follow-up. We know it is. And so from that point onward, from March of 2015 onward, yes, we had Splatoon 1. Splatoon 1's an amazing game. It's my favorite game in the series, and it's another flagship title for the system. But by then it was too late. People weren't going to buy Wii U's for Splatoon 1 because we already knew the Wii U's days were numbered. The second they announced the NX in March of 2015, at basically the halfway point of the system's short, 4-year life cycle, it was over. Like, everyone that bought Splatoon or bought Twilight Princess HD or bought Star Fox Zero or whatever came out after March of 2015, those were just people that already had a Wii U anyway. No one was buying a Wii U after March of 2015, for the most part, because we all saw the writing on the wall, and they basically told us without actually telling us. And then the Switch came out just a few years later and blew the doors off of everything. They had Breath of the Wild, which, whether you think it's as good as everyone makes it out to be, it is undeniably a landmark title, one of the most critically acclaimed and beloved games of all time. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's an absolute classic, and it's going to be a game that 20, 30 years from now, people are going to look back on in the same way that they do about Ocarina of Time or Final Fantasy VII. It is an enduring classic that is never going to go away. And of course, combined with Splatoon 2, ARMS, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Mario Rabbids, which is a game that people thought was going to suck before it came out. And then it came out and it was actually pretty good. Then we had, some other smaller titles like Fire Emblem Warriors and whatnot, Pokken DX. And then we had, Mario Odyssey is the big holiday title of the year, as well as Xenoblade 2. And they had a killer 2017 lineup. A lineup that many people still opine for to this day because, and this is not a controversial take in the slightest, we have not had a lineup that solid and that hard-hitting since 2017. However, one of the big problems of that glorious 2017 lineup that we all praise so much is that it came at the cost of 2018 having far less in terms of notable titles. Sure, there were a couple of games, we had Mario Tennis Aces, we had Kirby Star Allies, we had some various DLCs and updates and ports like Bayonetta 1 and 2, Tropical Freeze, so on, but let's be real here. 2018 was Smash. It was just Smash. Everything else was nothing by comparison. Yes, we had Let's Go, but Let's Go was kind of the beginning of the controversial era of Pokemon that we're thankfully, seemingly finally getting out of with wins and waves. We're finally escaping the controversial era of Pokemon that kind of started with the Switch era. But, Smash was the game, and obviously Smash is my favorite franchise, so I didn't mind that. I didn't mind that 2018 was basically just waiting for Smash, because Smash is the game for me. It's the one. It's the SSS tier. This is the most important thing ever. Everything is nothing by comparison. That is the king of the mountain. That is Mount Everest of gaming for me, is Smash. So I didn't have an issue with that. But compared to 2017, they really didn't have much. And that's something that we'll get to this when we get to it, but has been much more resolved this time around. I think they've learned their lessons from having a kind of dry 2018. I think they've learned that lesson, but again, I'm getting way off track. We're supposed to be talking about the Switch 2 here, and we're talking about the Switch 1. But look, this video is going to be an hour long anyway, so you know what? If I spend time talking about the stuff before the Switch 2, whatever, there's a reason for it. Because it all will come into place when you look at the Switch 2. Because the Switch 2 rectifies several key problems that happened with the Switch 1 and Wii U early on. The Wii U's biggest problem, they took way too long to get heavy hitter games out the door. Now the Switch 1 fixed this, but then the Switch 1 had the problem of there was too many heavy hitter games in that first year that 2018 really suffered until Smash came out at the very end of the year. And the Switch 2, again, we'll get to when we get to it, has, in my opinion, pretty much fixed that issue. 2026, overall, even though I would personally throw all the 2026 games in the trash for Smash 6, but that's just me. That's my own personal biases. But putting that bias aside, 2026 overall is a much, much better year than 2018, even if they don't have any games that are on the same level as Smash just yet, although we might be getting one that comes close later on, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Anyways, we've been talking for 12 minutes, and we haven't even gotten really to talking about the Switch 2 proper. So you know what? We've talked about the Wii U. We've talked about the Switch 1, their pros, their cons. Now let's talk about where the Switch 2 comes in. The Switch 2 really dates back to the Switch 1. And I don't just mean that in the obvious, most literal sense ever, like obviously it does. No, I mean, talk of future hardware beyond the Switch really started around 2019. The beginning, the early days of the Switch Pro rumor cycle that I'm sure we all very much remember, and of course in retrospect, we all know how that all went. I'm not going to get into all of that because we've already spent way too much time talking about stuff that isn't the Switch 2 as is. But that Switch Pro rumor cycle, man, this was, I think people need to understand why was the Switch Pro rumor cycle so pervasive? Why did it just seemingly never go away? Sure, early on it was kind of hit and miss, but by like 2020 and 2021 especially, it was like, oh yeah, the Switch Pro was like the only thing anyone wanted to talk about. Everyone was making videos on it. I made a video on it, which I think is a mostly good video, even though obviously it all aged like milk. But, the potential options of Switch Pro, if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go watch it, even if it's all completely obsolete. But anyways, the reason why, in my opinion, the Switch Pro just was this thing that never went away was because of two reasons. One, obviously Nintendo has had a history of doing pro consoles. Well, not literally pro consoles, because the pro moniker didn't really start to become a thing until, of course, the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. But before that, we had the new 3DS, which was a faster 3DS that had games on it that you couldn't even play on the original 3DS. There weren't that many of them, but they did exist. Or games that just ran much better. Like, I never played Sun and Moon on the 3DS, but I've heard from people that Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon on the original 3DS doesn't run great, but it runs just fine on the new 3DS. So even if the games weren't literally exclusive, you could tell that they were optimizing for the newer consoles more. Or at least that's how it felt back in the day to people that didn't have a new 3DS at the time. Now, of course, by that point, I had a new 3DS, so it didn't matter to me. Not that I played that game anyway, but anyways, we're getting off track. We're supposed to be don't worry, I have a whole list. We're gonna get to the Switch 2 proper. I promise we will. I swear to God we will actually talk about the Switch 2. We really will, I promise, but I can't help myself. Anyway, why do I think the Switch Pro rumors persisted so much? Number one reason, well, not number one, but like one of the reasons is definitely Nintendo had a history, right? We had the DSi, we had the new 3DS, we had the Game Boy Color. We also had add-ons like the 64DD, which of course famously didn't pan out the way that Nintendo wanted, right? You know, the 64DD was supposed to be this really big deal for the N64. All the big games were going to be on it, and then because it took too long to come out, games either got canceled or moved the cartridge, and so that's a whole other thing. But point is, there's a history. There's a history of Nintendo doing it. So it wasn't just, oh, Sony and Microsoft did it, therefore Nintendo has to do it, because obviously Nintendo, famously, for better or for worse, very much likes to do their own thing, especially these days. You know, sure, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, they were focused on power, they were focused on specs, they were focused on pushing the boundaries of console gaming, at least from a technical perspective. Then, of course, Iwata came in, and he really pushed forward the Gunpei Yokoi, you know, lateral thinking with withered technology, I believe is the famous line, where essentially it's, what can we do that's different, that isn't just pure grunt, that we can do with cheaper technology that's more affordable for everyday people, and also, of course, means not as expensive for us to make, obviously, has that benefit too. All that stuff, right? How can we make more compelling technology that sets us apart from the competition for a cheaper price? That was essentially the idea, right? I mean, the Game Boy again, this goes back to Gunpei Yokoi, right? The Game Boy famously had the infamous green spinach screen that you could barely look at. Now, of course, the Game Boy is not from my era, but I have a Game Boy Color. I have a Pokemon Game Boy Color I got from my cousins a long time ago. And let me tell you, whenever I would try to play Pokemon on that thing, yeah, it was not great, and this carried over as far late as like the original Game Boy Advance. It wasn't until like the backlit Game Boy Advance SP that handheld, the Nintendo handhelds, had what I would call an acceptable screen on them, but that's besides the point. But you know, we had the green spinach Game Boy screen, when the Game Gear had a backlit color screen, and there's the Atari Lynx and other stuff as well, right? So they had the weaker specs, but they had the lineup and they had the price point, right? The Game Boy was cheaper than the Game Gear, and it had the games. Same goes for, the other handhelds, the Game Boy Advance. I mean, granted, the Game Boy Advance didn't really have any competition. The DS had competition with the PSP. And again, the DS, obviously was worse specs, weaker screen, but it had the games. I mean, the PSP obviously did really well. It sold like 80 million units, but anyways. Again, we're supposed to be talking about the Switch 2 here, and we're still talking about older stuff. Oh my god. Oh man, okay, come on. We really gotta get to actually talking about the Switch 2 proper here. So, Nintendo made enhanced versions of their previous consoles. That's the main point. Or at least their handhelds, more so than the consoles. Then second, obviously, Sony and Microsoft were doing the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, so people got used to the idea that we could get a mid-gen refresh. So people figured, well, why can't Nintendo do that? And then, of course, I think secretly probably the number one main reason, I think, why it lasted for so long, why people were convinced it was going to happen, is because people secretly, just really wanted to have something that was better than the original Switch. At least, I think, among certain people. Maybe not everyone, but I think for some people, it was like, we wanted to will the Switch Pro into existence because we desperately wanted a Nintendo console that could do more than 1080p. That wasn't shackled by 2015 Tegra hardware like the Switch One was, Especially for those of us that had 4K TVs or 4K monitors, which, we got a 4K TV in 2017, the same, not at the time the Switch One launched, but later that year. And then in 2020, I got the 4K monitor that I'm using to this day. And, that was the point where I personally was really like, man, I really want the Switch Pro to exist because I desperately want a Nintendo console that can at least take some advantage of this 4K screen. Obviously, it wasn't going to be native 4K. Obviously, it was going to be upscaled or lower resolution or DLSS. But still, that was better than what it was beforehand, especially later on in the generation when the Switch One started to kind of struggle in games more, in first-party titles, I should say. Obviously, third-party games are always a challenge on the Switch One, but as long as the first-party games ran well, that was what mattered. But then, in the second half of the generation, especially in those last couple of years, you started to see the Switch One really, really being pushed, even in big first-party releases. But Anyways, so the point is, again, I've already dragged this, what's essentially the prelude to the Switch 2. I've already dragged this segment out way too long anyway. Point is, everyone thought the Switch Pro was going to exist for a variety of reasons. It never happened. We got the Switch OLED instead. And one of the speculations as to why the Switch Pro didn't happen was because of, the chip shortage that was happening at the time, right? Because, of course, this was the pandemic era. This was during the chip shortage, all that stuff, right? And one of the theories is that the Switch Pro did exist. And that's why all those rumors, including the one from the guy at Bloomberg, which I think was the guy that had the most credibility at the time, because he had leaked the Switch Lite a few years prior. Essentially, the Switch Pro did exist. They really were making it, but because of the chip shortage, they were like, you know what? Let's just take what was going to be the Switch Pro, and since we're not going to we're not confident in having the chip capacity for it, let's just take the existing X1 that we're already using in the current Switch, and let's just throw it in there, and we'll call it the Switch OLED, right? Because if you think about it, it makes sense, because if you look at the Switch OLED, it has more storage, it has the much better kickstand, it has the OLED screen, bigger screen, it has the newer dock with the Ethernet put on it. Like, all that stuff is the kind of thing you would expect from the Switch Pro. Essentially, the Switch OLED was the Switch Pro minus the Pro. That was the big issue with it, at least for someone like me, because I am not someone that plays in handheld mode. So while it's cool that we got the OLED screen, that's great for people in handheld mode, but for me, it did nothing. So I had no reason to get a Switch OLED and not just run my current 2017 Switch into the ground, basically. But yeah, so point is, personally, I am gonna agree that I subscribe to the idea that yes, the Switch Pro was going to be a thing, and then they changed it partway through. Because the Switch OLED is everything the Switch Pro clearly was supposed to be, minus the actual Pro part, minus the better chip and the higher resolution and the DLSS and all that, And it was a real shame, especially at the time, But it is what it is. But because we didn't get that Switch Pro, it made the wait for the actual next system feel longer than it otherwise would have. If we had gotten that mid-gen refresh, people would not have been clamoring for new hardware as much as they were. But because we skipped the Switch Pro and it didn't actually happen, that meant we were stuck with 2015 Tegra Maxwell hardware that came out in 2017 for the actual system. We were running that as late as 2022, 2023, 2024. Which now brings us finally into the next part, which is still not the Switch 2, but we're getting there, which brings us into the next segment, which is essentially the prolonged life cycle of the Switch 1. For a lot of people, Tears of the Kingdom was the grand finale of the Switch 1, right? This was the last really big flagship system-selling game for the two people that didn't have a Switch 1 already. This was the last really big game. It was supposed to come out in 2022, got pushed back to 2023 because they wanted to polish it. That's confirmed, by the way. The reason why they pushed it back a year was because they wanted to spend a year polishing it. The game was done in 2022, like March 2022. The game was essentially feature complete, but they wanted to spend all that time polishing it, which, hey, not going to complain about that, but it did make the generation feel longer than it otherwise would have if the game had launched a year before, but whatever. Once Tears of the Kingdom was out the door, we all assumed, okay, now that this game is out the door, the last big hurrah of the Switch 1, now we're going to finally start to move towards the Switch 2. But that didn't really happen, at least not as fast as we all wanted it to, because immediately after Tears of the Kingdom, just a few months after, in October, we of course got our first new 2D Mario since New Super Mario Bros. U launched with the Wii U in 2012 with Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which obviously was a big hit. It was a change for the series stylistically, and obviously did pretty well. But then we also had Super Mario RPG, and we had Princess Peach Showtime, and we had the 1,000-Year Door coming back, for crying out loud, which was insane at the time. Or at least it should have been bigger than it was. I think this is a little bit of a side tangent. I know I've already gone on way too many tangents, but I promise this won't be too long. I feel like the 1,000-Year Door coming back should have hit way harder than it did. Don't get me wrong, it was still a big deal, but it came in the September Direct after the June Direct that just had back-to-back-to-back announcements. So it was like, especially if we had not gotten Mario RPG already, I think it would have hit harder. But because we had gotten Mario RPG already, it kind of dulled the hype for Thousand Year Door. I mean, it was still a massive deal, obviously. You know, fan favorite game for many, myself included. Thousand Year Door is one of the first Nintendo games I ever played, so I have a very strong connection to it. But anyways, you know, we had Echoes of Wisdom. We had the new Mario and Luigi, the first Mario and Luigi since Alpha Dream shut down in 2019. You know, we had games still. Like, we were like, how is there still, like, every time we got a direct from after Tears of the Kingdom came out up until like 2025, it was like, how the hell is there still more stuff for this console? And not just small stuff, because like obviously we had some ports. We had Pikmin 1 and 2, various other. Oh yeah, we had Pikmin 4, by the way. That finally came out. But you know, we had some smaller titles for sure, but we also still had like, hey, new 2D Mario, new 2D Zelda, remake of a beloved Paper Mario game. Like, we still had big stuff coming out on the Switch 1 so late in its life cycle, when we all thought that surely the Switch 2 would either have been announced or released by now, right? And it just didn't. They just kept going and going with the Switch 1. They would not let the Switch 1 die. And I understand why. It's their most successful console. I get why they want to milk it as much as possible. But man, especially in 2024, especially in that second half of the year, it really was like, just freaking announce the Switch 2 already. Just announce it. And then finally, in, I want to say it was May of 2024, our first 100% from the horse's mouth confirmation that the Switch 2 existed was confirmed when Furukawa himself put out a tweet saying the successor to Nintendo Switch will be revealed by the end of the year. Or no. What he said was that we would get more info by the end of the year, which did not happen. I don't think. I know he put out a tweet after that point that said it was coming out in 2025, I believe. But we didn't get a reveal, even though we all figured for sure, because we thought they were going to repeat what they did with the Switch 1, because the Switch 1 was revealed in October of 2016, and then it came out in March 2017. We figured they were going to do the exact same thing again, October or September, because they didn't do a September. That was another thing too. They didn't do a September Direct that year. They skipped the September Direct in 2024. So we all assumed that, well, if they're going to skip the September Direct, that's because they're going to announce the Switch 2 in place of it. And they didn't do that. They just decided to not announce the Switch 2 at all for that entire year, which was really annoying. And you could tell they took too long, because fast forward to early 2025, around CES, we started to get those leaks of the molds and, of course, all the accessories that were breaking the NDA because Nintendo just took too damn long to reveal the thing. It was clearly supposed to be revealed earlier. It was supposed to be revealed in 2024, and for whatever reason, they just decided to not. They decided, we're gonna wait until January. And then finally, January, I'm fast forwarding to the launch period. In January, I believe it was January 16th, 2025, after years of speculation and wait, we finally got the reveal trailer for the Switch 2. And compared to the Switch 1's reveal trailer, it really wasn't anything special. It was a pretty basic, very, tech-focused trailer, which I didn't have an issue with. In fact, in some ways, it was actually really surprising, as we would see, especially more so when we got to the April Direct. But, that big, bombastic, the iconic, like, the reveal of the Switch 1, it was not. I wasn't expecting it to be honest, but it would have been nice if we had gotten something at least sort of like that. But the Switch 2 reveal trailer was much more like a successor to the old Switch 1 era, like, hardware overview trailer, where it's, it's a white background with, the console flying everywhere, and they're showing, here's the screen, here's the Joy-Cons, here's how it plugs into the TV, here's the menu, whatever. That was pretty much what, I mean, we didn't know what the menu looked like at the time, but you know what I mean, like, it was very much like that. It was not like the Switch one where we had the ha 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 yeah, and we had the actors, and we had like the tournament, we had the it was not like that at all. It wasn't the big bombastic trailer where they were just throwing money at the screen. It was not like that at all. It was a very subdued trailer that was basically just here's the Switch 2, now shut up already. Stop asking for it. That's very much how it felt like. It very much felt like there, you happy? Here's the Switch 2. There, stop yelling at us to reveal it already. That's very much how it felt, you know? And don't get me wrong, the Switch 1 took a long time to get revealed as well. Again, this is a whole other story for another time, but like the lead up to the Switch 1 felt like forever as well. But at least with that one, there wasn't like a prerequisite. There wasn't like an established, like, oh, they're going to do this at this time. Because, you know, it wasn't like that back then. You know, it was completely different. Especially because the NX at the time, of course, you know, we didn't know what the NX was going to be, right? You know, this was brand new territory. Whereas we all knew the next Nintendo console this time around was going to be the Switch 2. Like, of course, like, the Switch 1 was insanely successful. They'd be crazy to not do a direct follow-up like they did with the NES to Super NES or the DS to the 3DS. Obviously, Wii U didn't really work out, but those other two ones worked out, even if they didn't sell as much as the original consoles. But anyways, we got the reveal, and we got pretty much most of the stuff we wanted. We got a much bigger screen. We got, much improved Joy-Cons. We got a little tease of the mouse functionality. And we saw, finally, after years and years and years and years and years, we finally got to see a little sneak peek, just a little, 5-6 second clip of Mario racing around in the new Mario Kart game, which, of course, was a big deal, because we had not had a new Mario Kart game since 2014 on the Wii U, at least on the console side. So that was a big deal, even if we didn't see much. So, I would say the reveal trailer was fine. If you want to know my opinions on the reveal trailer when it came out, I made a video reacting to the reveal trailer when it came out. You can go watch that. It's on the main channel. But essentially, the reveal trailer was definitely no Switch 1 reveal trailer, but I guess it's befitting a console that's a direct successor to its predecessor and doesn't really need to establish itself or make a big name for itself because, you all know what this is. It's the Switch 2. It's the Switch, but better. That's all they need to sell on. That's all they have to say. They don't have to make a big stink about it because we all know what it is and we're all going to get it. This isn't like the Switch 1 where they had to really crank out that marketing because, it's the Switch 2. If you have a Switch 1, you're going to buy Switch 2. It's as simple as that. Like, they didn't have to really push it too hard. So, that now finally brings us to the April 2025 Direct. But actually, before that, we had that surprise Switch 1 Direct, which gave us Tomodachi Life and Rhythm Heaven, and also gave us the Nintendo Today app. But after that, finally, April 2025, the big Direct for the Switch 2. And this is a Direct that, honestly, I feel like it's been a very long time since I've been genuinely hyped for a Direct. And I think that's because I've become very used to how Directs operate and how likely or unlikely something that I want to see is going to be in it. So while obviously I'm going to be there for every mainline Direct no matter what, it's been a long time since we've had a Direct that has a chance of revealing something that I'm going to be really, really excited for. But this was the first Direct where it really felt like anything's on the table, right? This is a brand new generation. There's no established, this game is already on the system. There's none of that. Outside of, obviously they're not going to show a new 3D Zelda because it's too soon. But aside from that, anything is on the table. They can reveal any game from any series. It was all on the table, and that was kind of exciting. Now, obviously, we weren't going to get everything, but we knew we were going to get at least a couple of really big games. So that was definitely exciting. In fact, I very nearly made a bingo card. You know how back in the day people used to make those Nintendo Direct bingo cards? I'm sure some people still do it, but I know that was very popular in the late 2010s. People would do those bingo cards. I actually almost did a bingo card for the Switch 2 Direct. That's how pie in the sky I felt like the potential was. That I wanted to make a bingo card. I've never made a bingo card before for a Direct. Certainly not since the Twitter days, if I even made one back then. I don't know, I'd have to check. But point is, it felt like, well, obviously, you got to come down to earth to some extent, but it really did feel like just about anything could be here. There was no, we're probably only going to get this. There was no procedure. There was no tempering for the most part. It was very much like we could get almost anything. We're not gonna get everything, and I'm probably not even gonna get the stuff I really want to see the most, but we're gonna get at least like a few, like 3, maybe 4 really solid announcements out of this, no matter what. And this is gonna be a pretty, we'll get the release date, we'll get the price, and it'll be a pretty solid, easy sweep for them. Pretty solid, easy win. We'll get Mario Kart officially revealed. We'll get the new 3D Mario revealed. We'll get X and whatever game reveal. We'll get all this stuff, and it'll be pretty solid, easy win. The Direct came, and the Direct had a lot of cool stuff in it. We had Mario Kart World. We had Donkey Kong Bonanza. We had Kirby Air Riders. We had upgrade packs, which was a big improvement because people were very worried that we were going to have to pay like $70 for every new re-release. Like, no. If you have the game, you can just pay the upgrade pack. That's way better. So the day and so all those Switch 1 ports that you had to pay full price for, that's dead. But now you could just have the upgrade packs. Now you can buy those games like fully. You can even get physical copies, which is cool. But you can just get the upgrade pack for like $10 or $20, and that's so much better. And it's like, thank God. We also got the reveal of 120 hertz, 1080p screen, 1440p output support in dock mode, which was genuinely mind-blowing to me because Sony took forever to add 1440p support. They took forever to add 1440p support to the PS5 when it should have been on the PS4 Pro already. And yet here we are, Nintendo, the console that is, the company that is infamously stuck in the past half the time. They somehow incorporated 1440p at launch on a new console. And, of course, 4K, obviously. But the 1440p was genuinely surprising to me. That might not sound like a big deal to most people, but I was genuinely surprised. I was convinced that maybe we'll get 1080p, but we're not going to get 120 hertz, and we're definitely not going to get 1440p. And we got 120 hertz and 1440p. Now, we didn't get that. Now, we didn't get 1440p in handheld, to be clear. But in dock mode, we got 1440p, and that was honestly a really cool addition. It didn't really matter to me at that point. That would have been more relevant on like my old 1440p monitor, which didn't have a 4K downscale, so it had to be 1440p proper support. That would have mattered for that. So it doesn't matter as much now, but I'm very, very happy that the Switch 2 supports native 1440p output support, in addition to 4K, of course. But, it also had VRR in handheld, not in docked. That's a small issue, but still, they were pushing the specs a lot more. They even had, not in that specific Direct, but they had Jensen, the leather coat wearing man himself. They did a video with him. That is how much they cared about the specs this time around, which I thought was actually very refreshing. Like, I know that, Nintendo's not about the specs these days, and that's true. But it's cool when they do focus on it. It's nice to see that Nintendo has embraced modern console features to some extent. Hey, look, not only do we have 4K, but we also have 1440p. We have 120 hertz support. We have VRR support. We have DLSS, of course. That's a big deal. We have we have ray tracing. We have all these modern features that the other consoles have on a Nintendo console. And that was just so nice to have. It was such a refreshing change of pace, to see, compared to the Switch 1, where the Switch 1, they did not talk about the specs at all. Obviously because they had nothing to brag about with it, but this time around they actually talked about the specs, and not just on a spec sheet on the website, but it was in the Direct. They are like 120 hertz, VRR, 4K, They had the video with Jensen, where they mentioned DLSS. It's like they're actually talking about the specs on a Nintendo console. That was kind of crazy, And yeah, Mario Kart World, it was a change of pace that I certainly felt like at the time, especially like, hey, if you're gonna make us wait this long for a new Mario Kart, making an open world is the right move. I know Mario Kart World is a bit of a divisive game, frankly, way more divisive than it should be in my opinion, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is made by the Odyssey team, which is a game I have not played yet, funny enough, even though I really should, because it's considered by many to be the best game on the console right now. But we got Donkey Kong Bonanza, first new Donkey Kong game since Tropical Freeze, and the first 3D Donkey Kong game since like Donkey Kong 64, like or maybe like Jungle Beat is 2D, I think. Whatever, you get my point. It's been a long time since DK's had a game, and more importantly, it's been a long time since DK's had a game from Nintendo themselves, right? DK, outside of the original arcade games, has been Rare back in the 90s, and then in the 2000s and 2010s, it was either miscellaneous developers for ports and stuff, or it was Retro Studios with their 2 games, right? So it had been a long time since we have seen a DK game from Nintendo themselves, and, again, I haven't played it yet. I know, I really should. I have it. It's sitting on my desk. I got it, at the end of last year. I haven't played it yet because it's a part of the backlog of games I need to get through, but I have it and I'm going to play it, and obviously it's considered to be a pretty good game by pretty much everyone. But yeah, Kirby Air Riders, that was also a cool reveal, obviously. This was Sakurai's first game, and I say first game because you better believe it's going to be the first and not the only one. But his first game on the Switch 2, and of course his first game since Ultimate, and we know he has a soft spot for air rides, so it made sense he would do Air Riders. That was pretty cool. So we got that. The trailer was very, very Smash. Like, you could tell it was clearly done by the same people that did the trailers for Smash 4 and Ultimate. And that reveal trailer is great, by the way. I love the way it's directed. It clearly has that Smash direction, on it, and it's very neat. The way you see him falling down, you're like, wait, what is this? And then you see Kirby and you're like, wait a second, I know that rendering style. Is this it? No, there's no way it is. They're not gonna actually reveal it, right? And then you see him hit the he hits the warp star, then you see the engine pop out, and it's like, oh, this is Air Ride. Okay, that's cool. So yeah. Also, we had some other games, like we had Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, which I never bothered playing, but, that was another title, and I'm sure, and we also had Drag X Drive, for those of you that remember that game, which is probably not many. We also had a game that I think everyone has already long forgotten about, but I'm going to bring it back because this is the 1 year video, so we got to bring it up. We, of course, had the, quote, game that was Welcome Tour, a game that I think if it was not called, I think legitimately half the problem is that they called it Welcome Tour. It sounds like it's a built-in part of the system, even though it's not, which it 100% should have been, right? Everyone unanimously agrees that Welcome Tour should have been a built-in thing on the system, or at the very least a free download. Because Sony had Astro's Playroom, which is a great game if you haven't played it. It's a great game. If you have a PS5, you have the game. It's built in. I believe it's pre-installed, and if it's not pre-installed anymore, it's a free download. Go download it. It's a great game. It's also a really cool love letter to PlayStation. All the different collectibles you can find, and there's the big collectible room with all the consoles and accessories. It's really cool. But yeah, go play Astro's Playroom. It's a great little built-in game, and it's the best built-in like pack-in title since Nintendo Land. It's a really, really good game. But point is, compared to Astro's Playroom, obviously this is like nothing, and I've seen a little bit of Welcome Tour, and it looks kind of neat, but man, even though it was only $10, it didn't matter. The fact that they were charging anything for it was the big issue with it. So now I guess let's talk. So, we had some cool reveals, right? Mario Kart World, Kirby Air Riders, DK Bonanza, some upgrades. We had, the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom upgrades. They're free if you have NSO, the expansion pack, various other things that were cool. That's all neat. We also had some third-party announcements, like FF7 Part 1 was announced for the Switch 2. There were a couple other games that were announced. Switch Street Fighter 6, Cyberpunk, and so on were announced for the some third-party games. We also had the Duskbloods, which we have not seen, by the way. We have not seen Duskbloods since the reveal. We haven't seen it at all since. So, I assume they're going to have it in the June Direct. They got it because it's still coming out this year as far as we know. But, so there's, solid game lineup, I would say. We didn't get 3D Mario, but we had DK Bonanza, which was essentially the 3D Mario equivalent. So I would say, in terms of the game lineup that they showed, solid. Not amazing, but solid. Unfortunately, though, even though most of the stuff we got in the presentation was neat and cool, it also came with some downsides. The first one is the game key cards. Now, the game key cards only affect third-party titles with one notable exception, but this has been a albatross that is just way down the Switch 2 for the last year for certain people. Anytime a third-party game gets announced, 99% of the time, it's a game key card, if it even gets a physical release at all. And yeah, I'm not gonna rehash the game key card thing. We all know about the game key cards. We all know how they work. We all know why people don't like them. But the game key cards just existing was definitely one big blemish on the Switch 2, even before it released, for some people. Then we had the price. Now, the price of the console was notably not in the presentation, which was very weird, because the Switch presentation from 2017, which was essentially the equivalent, the Switch 1 equivalent of this Direct, had the $299, $300 price tag in there, but they deliberately omitted it from this Direct. Now, at the very end, they were like, hey, we're going to have the base console and we're going to have the Mario Kart bundle, but they didn't give us a price on either of them. Very interestingly, which I think most people would probably be like, okay, if they're deliberately not telling us the price, it's probably because the price isn't good. And compared to what people were hoping for, it wasn't. But it also wasn't the worst price ever. It definitely could have been worse. But eventually we found out that the price of the console, even though it wasn't in the Direct itself, the price of the console was indeed $449 or $499 if you got the bundle with Mario Kart. Now, people were expecting $399, $400, myself included. That was certainly the price that I was hoping for, at least, because I felt like that would have slotted in perfectly, because we have the Switch Lite at $200, then we have the Switch 1, which is still, or at least at the time, it was still $300, and then we have the Switch OLED at $350, so it would only be natural that the Switch 2 would slot in at $400. $300, $350, $400, boom. Simple. And of course, they would probably end up discontinuing the OLED at some point, because now that the Switch 2 exists, it makes the OLED pointless, even though the Switch 2 isn't OLED, but you know what I mean? You know, they kind of target the same market, right? But, you know, it just made sense that it'd be $400, especially because, you know, obviously it's not going to be as expensive as the PS5 or the Series X, you know, because those are obviously more powerful consoles. But at the same time, the Switch 2 is a handheld, and it has the screen and all that stuff, so you have to take that into account as well. But I don't know, essentially, we were hearing rumors that the price was going to be higher than we would like. There were certainly rumors. I know there was a rumor that I think literally was that $450 for the base console, $500 for the Mario Kart bundle. I believe that was actually leaked beforehand, but I kind of like wrote that off as like, nah, they're not going to do a bundle with Mario Kart, and also it's not going to be $500, $450. No, this is going to be this will be $400, and if there is a bundle, it'll be $450 for Mario Kart. Nope. $450 base, $500 for Mario Kart, and the bundle only lasts for the rest of the year. Now, that didn't matter if you got it at launch, but still. So, strike number 1, game key cards, if you cared about that. Which, again, only affected third-party games. The first-party games didn't have that issue. The first-party games were, and still do, come on actual full carts, and they're it's only the third-party games that are where the game key cards are mainly an issue, with one exception. But game key cards, the higher than expected price tag for a Nintendo console, especially because again, the previous Nintendo console was $300, and the Wii U before that, I believe, was also around $300. So people were very used to the idea that yeah, the Nintendo consoles were weaker, but they were cheaper, and now they were weaker, but they weren't really that much cheaper. I mean, you could get, at least at the time, I don't know if this was actually true at the time, because of course the prices have changed multiple times in the last few years, but at least at launch, the PS5 Digital Edition was $400. I don't know if it was still $400, at least in the US. I know the prices went up in Europe a little while ago, but I don't know if at that time, And it's gone up now. I know it's gone up now, but at that point in April of 2025, I believe the PS5 and PS5 digital were still at their launch prices. I think. So you could have gotten a PS5 digital, which yes was digital and didn't have the disc drive, but at least it was $400 and it was better than the Switch 2 in terms of specs, obviously. But the Switch 2 was basically right at the edge of like premier console pricing for Nintendo, especially. I think the 450 pricing was not bad, but it was definitely pushing it. That's my take on the $450 price. Not counting the bundle. The bundle is a whole other thing. Just the base console, $450. It should have been $400. $400 would have been the right price tag for it, but fine, whatever. I mean, let's be real here. It's not going to stop me from getting one. So it's more of a perception thing than anything else. But yeah, I don't know. I wasn't thrilled with the price tag either, but at least Mario Kart was only $50 if you got the bundle, which now brings us to what I think is probably the number one controversy of the Switch 2 pre-launch. The GameCube cards were controversial. The $450 price tag of the console was controversial, but none of them were as big as, I believe, the number one controversy of the Switch 2 pre-release, which was the price of Mario Kart, which was, drum roll, well, not actually a drum roll, but you know what I mean, $799.99. That's right, Nintendo of all companies decided to be the one to break the $80 barrier. And oh boy, did it not go down well. Nobody liked that. Nobody liked that. Whether you liked the game or not, whether you were interested in the game or not, didn't matter. Everyone unanimously agreed that the $80 price tag was ridiculous. It was then, it is now. It was just, what? Like, and man, do I so wish it wasn't $80. I so wish it wasn't $80. Like, man, if there's one thing about the Switch 2's pre-launch I would have changed, it would have been make that sucker $70. I know people would have probably complained about even $70 to some extent, but at least that would have been the normal price at that point. Tears of the Kingdom was $70 before it, and all the other games are $70 now. $70, whether you like it or not, is the default price now. So people would have grumbled a little bit, but it wouldn't have been a big deal. Especially because we had already gone through this with Tears of the Kingdom a few years prior. But $80 for Mario Kart? That did not go down well. That's really all there is to say about it. They did not go down well. It was the number one complaint, and it put a lot of pressure on this game, more than it really should have gotten, in my opinion, but it did. And I think that again, fast forwarding a little bit here, I think it's one of the reasons why Mario Kart World is as controversial as it is. It's partially the game itself, but I think the fact that it that it came out at $80. I genuinely believe, wholeheartedly, if the game was $70, people would not have been nearly as harsh towards the game as they were. There would have been criticisms, to be sure, and the game is certainly not perfect. But people were extra critical of that game because it was $80. I am 100% convinced of that. Because, like, I don't know. I mean, I can't really blame people. I cannot blame people, if I'm being honest. I really can't blame people for being more critical. But of course I didn't like that. Like, this is Mario Kart. This is not Mario Sports. This isn't Pokemon. You know, this is a franchise that is safe in that it comes out, we all like it, and then that's the end of the story. That's how Mario Kart is supposed to work. Mario Kart games are one of the staple franchises that everyone likes, everyone's on board with, and doesn't really get any major controversy. Yes, the Booster Course Pass had some controversy, especially at first, but whatever controversy the Booster Course Pass had was nothing compared to the $80 in Mario Kart World. So why was it $80, you ask? Well, I think it's two reasons. Number one, Mario Kart World, as we would find out later in a developer interview on the website, took too long to come out. It took too long to come out, right? It was supposed to come out on the Switch 1, and then it got pushed back, and because of that we got the Booster Course Pass, which I think was definitely the right move. I mean, again, Booster Course Pass has its flaws, but it was 100% worth it. It took Mario Kart 8 from being a good game to being the best Mario Kart, bar none. It is it is Mario Kart Ultimate. It's the one Mario Kart game that, like, if you don't want to play any of the others, like, if you can only have one Mario Kart game to play for the rest of your life, that's the one you play. Is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with all the DLC. But the game got delayed. It was supposed to be on the Switch 1, got pushed back to the Switch 2, and so they probably figured, like, what happened with Tears of the Kingdom, you know, this one's taking longer than we expected, and this is going to be a big title, so you know what? $80. And I'm sure they knew that that wasn't going to go down well. I'm sure they knew that wasn't going to go down well, but they just kind of were like... I mean, granted, of course, we're not going to know who made that call. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't the devs. I'm sure it wasn't the director or whatever of Mario Kart World. I'm sure that was, you know, obviously some finance guy in Japan or whatever. I mean, of course they're in Japan, but you know what I mean? Like, obviously it wasn't the dev team that said, let's make this $80, but I'm sure some, you know, big suit, you know, on the board was like, you know, this game took so long to come out and it's Mario Kart, and look how good the last one sold, you know, how it sold 1 billion copies, you know, so we'll make it 80. It's not going to go down well, but it will sell. And they were right, but only because they had the bundle. And maybe that was a part of it. Maybe that was a part of their selling point. Maybe there was pushback at Nintendo to the $80 price, and they're like, okay, we're going to make it $80, but we're going to have the bundle at launch, so if people really don't want to pay $80, they don't have to. And I do think that helped. As much as the $80 price tag sucked, and everyone unanimously agrees on it, whether they like Mario Kart World or not, everyone unanimously agrees the $80 price tag was a terrible idea. It shot the Switch 2 in the foot, and now Nintendo, unfortunately, is going to be tarred with this for the rest of their existence. Because now, for the rest of gaming history, we're all going to say Nintendo was the one to do $80 first. They couldn't let GTA 6 be $80 or some other game take the hit. No, Nintendo had to be the ones to fire the shot and get all the backlash and totally tank the console pre-release. And that was really annoying, man. Like, that was just, I think I can safely say that, like, that $80 price tag, I think, is the worst decision they have made post-Iwata. In the 10 years since Iwata, I know people like to invoke Iwata a lot. I don't really do that, but... And I'm not going to sit here and claim on a pedestal that he would never charge $80. But what I am saying is this, like, nothing that they have done under Kimishima, or Kimishima? How do you say? I haven't said his name in so long. Under him or Furukawa, none of the controversy that they have had over the last few years, because there has been more and more controversy in the last couple of years, I will say. None of that is the $80 Mario Kart. I think that is easily the worst decision that they have made in the last decade, for sure. It's just, it was such an unnecessary blow. They did not need to do it. They could have just charged $70. And yes, people would have still debated, you know, the intermissions and all that stuff. And that wouldn't have changed even if the game was $20, but man, the game would not have gone through the ringer, at least initially, in that initial kind of few months leading up to it would not have gone through the ringer as much if they had not charged a stupid price tag for it. But they did, because I guess they figured it's Mario Kart, and we have the bundle, so we have an out for the people that don't want to pay $80. They can just get the bundle. Now, it's not physical, it's digital, but at least it's there. And that definitely was so they at least had some inkling of what was going to happen. Because I think if they were actually insane, if they actually just had no regards for anything, they wouldn't have had that bundle. They would have just been like, nope, you're going to pay $80, deal with it. But they at least had the bundle, which isn't much. It didn't really help that much. because the bundle was temporary, and we knew it was temporary because they told us it was temporary. Plus, the bundle was only digital; you didn't get the physical copy of the game. If you wanted the physical copy, you had to pay the $80. So, yeah, I know I'm harping on this $80 thing a lot, but I think and I know that this was only a year ago, so I'm sure we're all very familiar with it. But man, I just remember that $80 price tag. It wasn't the only thing, but I think that really was like such a big dog on the Switch 2 and especially Mario Kart itself. And it was just really annoying now. And it's annoying that that's going to be forever a thing tied to the game and also the Switch 2 and Nintendo in general. Like even though we'll get this when we get to it, but the pricing has improved a lot since then. Like the pricing overall has improved a lot since then. We'll get to that when we get to it, but man, they really were swinging for the fences early on. And like at launch, like man, they really were like swinging for the fences, and man, that was just such a terrible idea. Worst idea that they have had in the last decade that I can think of. I can't think of a single other controversial moment in the last 10 years. And there's been a lot of them. I can't think of a single controversial move from them in the last 10 years that's as bad as that $80 price tag for Mario Kart. But it is what it was. And you know what? Despite the controversies, I was still excited for the console. I mean, obviously, as you can probably assume, I'm obviously a pretty big Nintendo fan, so of course, it didn't matter didn't matter about the game key cards, it didn't matter that it was going to be $500 with the bundle, it didn't matter that it was $80 Mario Kart, all that stuff, as annoying as some of that was, especially from a perception standpoint, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. I was going to get this sucker day one, no matter what. And when the pre-orders opened on, I believe it was April 23rd, that was definitely an experience because that was the first time I'd ever done that. The Switch 1 pre-order period, I wasn't able to do that, but this time around, I was ready. I had the money in my account, I had all my stuff updated for Target, GameStop, Walmart, everything, and I was ready. I was ready to go. And so when I believe it was 9 p.m. hit, I was just go. And eventually I was able to get one at Walmart, got the bundle. I was very, very happy. And fast forward to launch, and Walmart delivered because I believe they said they were promising like, oh, we're going to deliver it by 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. And I'm like, yeah, right. And you want to know what they did? They delivered it at like 6:30 a.m. And they even included a Coke and chip and Pringles. And that wasn't just me. They did that for everyone, which was really cool. So Walmart, big W for Walmart. I know Walmart, it's probably not everyone's favorite company to give W's to these days, but god damn it, they did a great job both delivering the Switch 2 and also throwing in some bonuses. So like the guys at Walmart, they solid win, solid W from Walmart. That is a solid win from them, the way that they handled the Switch 2 launch. But yeah, then the console finally launched. We're finally here. The console launch. We're an hour in. To this discussion, and we're only just now at launch day. I mean, you don't come here for short, concise discussions now, do you? Even still, though. But yeah, so the Switch 2 finally launched. And I have to say, when I woke up and I grabbed the Switch 2 box, which was sitting in the living room because I believe my dad actually brought it in. Because it was outside, but he brought it in, or someone brought it in. I don't actually know who. But it was there, and I immediately got everything set up, and I actually recorded an unboxing video. And then halfway through, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I still have the footage for what I've recorded, though. I might put that up at some point, but we'll see. But yeah, so I have to say that was a pretty cool experience, being able to unbox a brand new Nintendo console on day one. And man, it was pretty sweet, I have to say, feeling the new Joy-Cons for the first time was like, oh my god, these are so much better than the old ones. The sticks are so smooth, they feel just a lot higher quality. The Switch 2 itself was so much bigger, because again, I didn't have an OLED. I skipped the OLED. I went from the original Switch to the Switch 2, so the leap in size was huge, especially at first. Like, oh man, this screen's so much bigger, and we got the new grip, and of course we have the code and everything, and it was pretty sweet. Although I will say there was one problem with the Switch 2 launch for me personally. I'm not gonna speak for everyone else, but this is just my experience. As awesome as it was getting the Switch 2 at launch, and I 100% do not regret it in the slightest, there was one hiccup that came from getting the console on day one. The built-in system transfer function did not work. I tried for an hour, but it would get to like the 14-15% mark and it would just fail every time, no matter what I did, and it just would not work. So eventually I, of course, called Nintendo, told them about it, and then I spent like an hour with them on the phone doing everything in the world to try and get it to work, and it still wouldn't work. And also, by the way, this is a total aside. This is really, really stupid. But if you've ever done that system transfer process and you've had it fail over and over again, like I have, and you just want to be like, you know what, screw it, I'll just do the console stock and I'll just transfer stuff over later, you have to do like some button combination on the menu to be able to back out. Because if you just turn the console off and turn it back on, it will automatically try and do the transfer again, and then it'll just keep failing over and over again, at least back then. For me, it was failing, at least. I'm not saying that everyone's system transfer failed, but it did for me. And the fact that it was some like Konami code nonsense to back out of the system transfer was like insane when I heard it. I was like, wait, what? Why is there not just a B button? Like, why is it not just B to go back or B to cancel? Like, why do I have to know this like 4 or 5 button combination just to cancel the system transfer? Like, that was ridiculous. And I don't know. I don't know. But eventually I was like, screw it, whatever. I'll figure out the transfer later. But eventually I got to a point where I realized that was never going to happen, because eventually, of course, I started racking up hours in Mario Kart World and other games, and that's when I realized, well, if I delete the system, because you have to format the system to do the system transfer again, right? That I'm gonna lose. So basically, I just realized at some point that I'm not gonna be able to do that system transfer. Now, of course, I moved everything over because you can transfer your save data and other stuff over via other methods, but I realized eventually that my hours were not going to transfer over properly, and that my hours were going to be stuck on the Switch 1 for those Switch 1 games. Not a big deal. It's a small sacrifice for day one, but that was kind of annoying because now it meant that, I had, especially at first, I had like 0 hours because it like reset everything. And then I found out, oh wait, you just have to boot the game up on the Switch 1 again and then it'll fix itself. But the number still won't go up on the Switch 2 because you didn't transfer it over the proper way. Again, it's a whole thing, but that was a bit annoying, the fact that I couldn't get the system transfer to work properly. And for what it's worth, I wasn't the only one, because Jackson, when he got his Switch 2 a few months later, he apparently had the exact same problem, where he kept trying to do the system transfer and it wouldn't work, so he just did the manual way, and now all of his Switch 1 hours are stuck on the Switch 1. So, I don't know, it's not a massive thing, but it is annoying, but whatever. But aside from the system transfer thing, it was pretty sweet. Being able to play a brand new Mario Kart at launch on a brand new system was a pretty sweet experience. I was gonna do a stream on day one, but eventually I was like, you know what? I want to savor this for myself. I want this to be a me thing. I don't need to do... Everyone else is gonna do a stream. I don't need to do a stream for this, That was a rare time where I was like, I'm not gonna do a stream for this. I want this to be... I want to experience this on my own. I think that was worth it, so, Despite some of the preamble, the Switch 2 at launch, I'm very much glad I did it. It was essentially, if you want to know my personal take on the Switch 2, from just a pure hardware perspective, basically it's the Switch Pro 5 years later, or 4 years later, I should say. Like, it's everything I could have wanted for the Switch Pro, but now it's the Switch 2, right? Again, 1080p screen, Ethernet port, 4K support, DLSS support, all that stuff. More storage space, all the stuff I wanted for the Switch Pro. That's essentially what the Switch 2 is. It's essentially the Switch Pro, just 4 years later, But hey, it was still nice to have, and yeah, so. definitely, again, even though that system transfer thing was kind of annoying, I still think it was worth it. I still think it was worth it. So I guess now let's talk about, so now that the console itself, we finally reached the part where the console itself is out, an hour in. Let's talk a little about the games. Now, this is not going to be that long because I've only played 2 of the Switch 2 games so far, even though I have 3 of them. Again, I have DK, but I haven't played it myself. So I've only played Mario Kart and Air Riders so far. So I can't speak personally to the other games, although obviously I will bring them up when we get to them. So let's go and talk about Mario Kart World. So Mario Kart World, as I've already stated, obviously a couple of times already in this video, is a game that obviously there was a lot of anticipation for it. We had not had a Mario Kart game in a very long time on consoles. You know, we've all been waiting for Mario Kart 9 for like half a decade, and we finally got it. And I like Mario Kart World. There are nitpicks I have with it, but I feel like as time has gone on, they have slowly addressed some of the bigger ones. But obviously, there are still some things about it that I think definitely need to be improved. But overall, I like it. If you want my like simple answer is, it's got flaws. It's got flaws. Mario Kart will, it has its flaws. It's not perfect, but despite its flaws, I still think it's a pretty solid game. I still really like playing it. I haven't played it as much, because I played it for like a month, right? Like that was the only game I played practically. I mean, not literally, but like I played a ton of Mario Kart World, in that first month. And then eventually I reached a point where when I was like 50, 60, 70 hours in, I was like, okay, I think I've played enough. I'm going to like put it on the back burner. I'll come back to it later, but let's give it a break. Let's not burn myself out on it, right? Because this is going to be the Mario Kart for the generation, so there's no point in burning myself out on it. So let's go ahead and just, we'll play it, and whenever I'm like, I think I should stop, then I'll stop, and that's what I did. Unlocked everything, all the most of the characters, all the carts, all the tracks, everything, I had played a good amount of it, and, and the game, again, I know that, like, the intermissions are kind of controversial, but I think the intermissions are one of those things where when they're done well, it's not an issue. But there are definitely ones in the game that are not very interesting to play on. I will say that. I think that, like, the meme of, like, straight lines is not really fair. Because they're not all straight lines. It's probably, like, maybe half. I would actually have to check to see. But, like, they're not all on the highways. Like, the meme is that they're all on the highways, but they're not. But I will say, the highway ones, generally speaking, are the worst ones of the intermissions, I will say. Although there are some of them that I think they're actually pretty alright. I think, in particular, the one on the bridge is pretty neat. I think the bridge is pretty cool. Because it has the cannons, and you can grind on the rails and stuff. I think the bridge one's actually probably, of all the, quote, straight line highway ones, the one on the bridge is definitely the best one. But I also think that, it's never really been an issue for me for the most part. I think the main conundrum people have with the intermissions is less the intermissions themselves, and it's more so that the game is so centered around them in certain ways. I mean, obviously the whole thing is the open world, right? And I will say, as far as the open world is concerned, I liked driving around it. I like driving around the open world. Obviously, it's not as detailed as something like Forza Horizon. There's not as much stuff to find and collect as a game like that. But I still think it was fun. But I also think they could definitely do more with it. Because in Mario Kart World, there are 3 main collectibles. There's the P-switches, which is about 150 of. You can knock those out fairly quickly, I would say, for the most part. Then there's all the coins, and then there are really the main proper things you get by driving around, which is, of course, all the P-switch missions. I like the P-switch missions. The P-switch missions are very much, I'd say they're basically about as close as the game gets to Forza Horizon, is those P-switch missions. They're kind of reminiscent of, like, the PR stunts, the speed. I mean, they're not literally like that, but, like, they're kind of in that same vein. Especially for some of them, I like the P-switch missions, I think, and there's a lot of them too. There's like almost 400. I think there's like 394. in the base game. There's 394. There's a lot of them, and man, they can get really hard to find at some points as well. It can get really hard to find at some points, especially when you get like to the last like 20 or so. Like they become really hard to find. And eventually, I just got to a point where I was like, I'm just gonna just bring me a map so I can like do a side by side and figure them out that way, But I will say, while I do like the P-Switch missions a lot, the big flaw with them, as well as the rest of the collectibles, is that you basically just get stickers that you can put on your profile or you can put on your car. And that's about it. It's not like, oh, you beat this P-Switch mission and you unlock a cart or a character or something. I don't know. Something more substantial. It's just stickers. I think that's the number one issue. Is just the fact that they're all the unlocks are stickers. Like why are they all stickers? Like, obviously you can't have 394 carts or whatever, but like, I don't know, you could at least have some of them be carts, some of them be characters, but like, all the P-Switches, all the Peach coins, all of those are stickers. They're all stickers. That's all they are, and I think they definitely should have done more with that. What about the tracks themselves? Now let's talk about the tracks themselves. The actual tracks I mostly like. I think my personal favorite of like the new tracks in Mario Kart World is probably what's it called? I want to say Boo Mansion, but I know that's not the name. It's Boo something. Boo Cinema. Boo Cinema. Or Absolute Cinema, as all the memes would say, right? But like, yeah, that track is pretty solid. It's a very classic Mario Kart feeling track. That track could be in, any of the other Mario Kart games. It's not at all reliant on the open world in any way. And it has a absolute banging music track. The music in this game is pretty good. In fact, the music is the one thing about Mario Kart World that we can all agree on. Whether you like Mario Kart World or not, whether you like the open world or not, whether you care about the intermissions or not, whether or not you like the game or not, everyone agrees the soundtrack is great. Both the new tracks are pretty good, but also all the remixes of all the old stuff is pretty good as well. I'm not going to go over all of them, but there are definitely some pretty nice standouts, I think. The Dire Dire Docks remix is pretty good. It's also the first time the song has been remixed officially in like 30 years, I think. Cool Mountain sounds really good. There's a lot of cool varying styles and genres that they use. Again, there's so many of them, I couldn't possibly get to all of them. But the point is, the soundtrack is really, really solid. One thing that's a little odd, though, is that Sky High Sundae just reuses the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe version, which is odd because Mario Kart 8 always redid the music, even if it stuck closely. Okay, that's not 100% true. Mushroom Gorge in the Booster Course Pass was just the original one, pretty much, but most of the other ones redo it to some extent, even if it's a minor change overall. But with Sky High Sundae, they just reused the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe version, or at least I'm pretty sure that's what they did, because I have listened to both of them side by side, and they sound identical to me. I've seen people in comment sections say, actually, no, this one instrument is different, or this one instrument has been added, but having heard the 8 Deluxe and the World version side by side, they sound 100% identical to me, basically. And if there is a difference in there, it's so incredibly minor that it basically doesn't mean anything. But yeah, Sky High Sundae, by the way, that track definitely got a big glow up in my opinion. Sky High Sundae is a track that people kind of memed on in the Booster Course Pass because of how much it looked like Fall Guys. but it looks a lot better. I mean, obviously graphically speaking, it's way better, but also just layout wise, it's better. They added new, aspects of the track that just make it more fun to race on. So, I think that, it was a worthy addition to the game, even if it does feel like, really, you're going to add Sky High Sundae of all the tour tracks, we're going to add this one, but especially when it was in the last game, but, I think it was worth including. I don't know. As far as the roster is concerned, the roster, I think is generally speaking fine, but I do think that they rely too much on the enemy characters. Like, yes, you have all your core essential characters, but there are a couple of notable ones that are missing. PD Piranha is not in it, despite the fact that he was in the Booster Course Pass, and King Boo is in this game, and he was also in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So that's kind of a weird omission, not having PD Piranha. Also, for some reason, Diddy Kong is not in this, even though they added him to 8 Deluxe at like the last second. So, I don't know. There's a couple of really weird omissions for sure, but overall, I don't mind the roster too much. Although I definitely think there are some characters that I think should be in the game. You know, namely PD Piranha and Diddy Kong are the most obvious ones. You know, Funky Kong would be nice too, but I get that Funky Kong was he's not like a character that's in everything. Like he was really only in Wii, and then he came back in 8 Deluxe because of how popular it was. So I don't know, it'd be cool if they brought him back again, but I'm not really asking for that. I just really want them to add more. Just add a couple more of the other legacy characters, and you know, maybe even a couple that we haven't had yet, and I think I'd be fine with that. But the main issue I would say with the roster on its own is the fact that the CSS in the game is not very good. They took the clean CSS of Mario Kart 8 and they kind of threw that away for this like overly big, overly long list where like all of the skins in the game are their own slot, and it's kind of annoying. They really should update that to at least add a like simplified Mario Kart 8 like option where, you know, here's Mario, and when you click on Mario, you'll get all of his skins, and you know, basically just do it the way that Mario Kart 8 did, where like, you know, Yoshi and Toad and whatever, you know, they had the different colors. Just have it be like that. Just give you like essentially a Mario Kart 8 style UI option, and then I think that would pretty much fix that issue, I would say. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, we could talk about Mario Kart probably some more, but this video is already long enough as is. Point being, I like Mario Kart World. I've played a lot of it. I've got 130 hours in it so far. The battle mode actually, funny enough, the battle mode actually brings back elimination, which was not in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I believe Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did not have elimination. If you don't know what I mean by that, essentially in all the old Mario Kart games, like, you know, Mario Kart 64, Double Dash, DS, and I believe Wii, I think also. A lot of the older Mario Karts, the way that Balloon Battle worked is like you lose all your balloons and that's it, you're out. Basically, it's like stocks in Smash, right? You know, you lose all your stocks and that's it, you're out of the game, right? But in Mario Kart 8 and 8 Deluxe, they changed it so that it's time-based, meaning that like you get 5-7 minutes, but every time you lose all your balloons, you just respawn, and you have a number in the corner telling you how many balloons that you've like taken from the other person. That's how it works, you know? So essentially, think of it like, yeah, again, it literally is like, just think of it in Smash terms. Like, they went from essentially stock to time. That's essentially what they did. But Mario Kart World goes back to essentially the stock format for Balloon Battle, which people liked more. And you know, I've enjoyed playing Balloon Battle every once in a while. We also have Coin Runners, and we also recently got Bob-omb Blast back. Also, they essentially use the open world to make the arenas, which is not as ideal as having completely crafted ones like Mario Kart 8 did, or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did, rather. Mario Kart 8 Vanilla famously did not do that. But essentially, I think the battle mode tracks in Mario Kart World is what the Mario Kart 8 Vanilla battle mode tracks should have been, where they use an existing track as the baseline, but they use it in a way that works way better. Like, I think the maps in Mario Kart World's battle mode are mostly fine. I think there might be like one or two I'm not really a big fan of, but most of them I think are at the very least fine. So yeah, I think the battle mode is decent. I think it's an improvement over Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's in some certain ways, but obviously it doesn't have as many modes as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did. We still don't have Shine Thief. We don't. Is Shine Thief in Mario? I think it's Shine. No, Shine Thief is in the game. We don't have Shine Thief, and we don't have the new one they added. What was it? The Cops and Robbers one. But you know, I like battle mode. I play it every once in a while. Obviously, it's never been a big focus, but you know, I like playing battle mode. But you know, overall point is, I like the game. Although there's one last thing I haven't talked about when it comes to Mario Kart World, and that is the online. So the online, I think this is where like a lot of the controversy kind of stems from, is the online. So when the game first came out, when you do like just the random worldwide online matches, right? You would get like the way it would work is that like before each match, you would get you would get 4 options. You would get 3 tracks, and then you would have random. Now the 3 tracks that would show up most of the time would be intermission ones, and you could tell if they were intermission ones if they had an arrow on the screen going in between them. But sometimes you would have ones that would kind of be their own bubble, and those ones were just the standard 3-lap, or just the standard 3-lap. But if you clicked random, it would always be 3-lap, is how it worked. So people eventually started, just picking random every single time. But then they changed it like a month in so that you got the intermission tracks a lot more often in that random mode, and that was very controversial. But then, over time, they slowly rolled that back. And at least the last time I was playing online, which was like maybe a month ago, I felt like I was getting a pretty... It never felt like... I felt like it was pretty even, in my opinion. It was like I would get, maybe like... I don't know. Like, I feel like I would say I would get like... Out of like 10 matches, I feel like, maybe 6... would be like, I don't know, maybe like 6 would be the I don't know. It felt like it was pretty even, I guess is my point. I felt like the intermissions versus the 3-lap was pretty even for the most part. In my opinion, at least. So, I don't know. I think it's improved. They've also added features to the online that help. Like, for example, before you couldn't play with friends in like the regular matches. You can only do the private lobby, and now you can just do normal online matches with friends like you could in Mario Kart 8, among other things. There's been other additions to the game as well. They added custom items back. They added Bomb Blast back, like I mentioned earlier, various other things. But, the game has slowly evolved over time, but we still don't have any DLC, which is really weird. I'm not going to get into it again. I literally made a whole short talking about the DLC if you want to hear me talk about it, but yeah. But overall, again, I'm going to be honest right now. I'm kind of tired. This video's gone on for way too long, so I don't really want to get into it too much more. But point is, it has its flaws, but I still think Mario Kart World is a good game, and I think that it does not deserve the kind of hate that it's gotten from some people. Yes, the price tag sucks. We all agree the price tag sucks, but I think the game itself has gotten too much heat, in my opinion. And that's my take. But again, maybe we can talk more in depth about Mario Kart World at some point. Probably when the game is like finished, like when all the DLC is done. We could do like a kind of, Mario Kart 8, Mario Kart World in its final form. We can look back on it then. But as of right now, it's annoying that we haven't gotten DLC yet, like proper DLC. But overall, I like the game, despite some of its flaws. Finally, moving on from that. Okay, Donkey Kong Bonanza. I haven't played this game yet, so I can't really speak to it, but it looks good. Most people like it. It's considered by a lot of people to be the best game on the system. That's really all there is to say about that. What's next up? I believe in Drag X Drive. Drag X Drive, man. This game, when it was first revealed, people were kind of like memed on it for being like ARMS without the sauce. And to be fair, that's kind of what it looks like. Now, it's not the ARMS team, because the ARMS team is the Mario Kart team, and obviously they were making Mario Kart. So it wasn't the ARMS team. It was actually some other team at Nintendo. But it certainly felt like this was their ARMS equivalent, but without any of the stuff that made ARMS cool. Because ARMS had the music, the characters, unique gameplay. This had unique gameplay, but it didn't look cool. It was all gray and dark, and there was no interesting character designs. It was it really what it did feel like ARMS minus like everything ARMS had going for it. Whether you liked ARMS or not, ARMS had good qualities to it 100%, and this game just kind of came and went. They did release it for only like $20, which is a rare instance of, at least in 2025, them having reasonable pricing for something. They may have charged $80 for Mario Kart, but at least they weren't crazy enough to charge $60 or $70 for Drag X Drive. They didn't do that. It was like $20. Most people skipped it. Most people probably don't even remember it came out, but it did technically come out, so I'm going to bring it up. Alrighty, next up, as far as new games, I believe is Legend ZA. Now, this is a cross-gen game, so it's not really a Switch 2 game per se, but it is a Switch 2 game still, so Yeah, I mean Legends ZA. I mean, I didn't play it myself, but I would say reception was kind of mixed at best. Is probably how I would probably put it. It has its fans, and it does have a shake up to the gameplay, but also all of the complaints people have had from the previous couple of titles, namely the visuals, right? People complained about the graphics, people complained about the flat buildings, all that stuff, all the usual stuff we've been hearing for the last couple of games. I don't know. Um, I don't have much to say about it. I don't know. The game, I haven't played it myself, so I can't speak to it, but I would say reception overall is fairly mixed. And I will say that the game definitely was not received as well as Arceus, because while Arceus had its criticisms, again, from a technical and performance perspective, people liked the underlying game. Whereas people did not like the underlying game of ZA as much, at least, I would say. But again, I haven't played it myself, so I'm going purely off of what people have said. Okay, next up, Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. I don't have anything to say about this game. It's another Hyrule Warriors, except this time it's based on Tears of the Kingdom. I didn't play it. Probably a lot of you didn't play it. I'm sure it did. I'm sure it got fine reviews like Age of Calamity did, but whereas Age of Calamity was kind of a big deal at the time, this one kind of feels like it came and went. So I don't know. Again, I didn't play it. I don't have anything really to say about it, but it did come out, and it is a Switch 2 game. It's also technically a Zelda game, so that's the thing. Kirby Air Riders. Now, this was the first game since Mario Kart World that I actually got. I was going to get DK when it came out, but I was too broke after blowing all my money to get the Switch 2, so I had to wait a while to get Donkey Kong. But the first game I was actually able to get, that I wanted to get day one, was Kirby Air Riders. Now, I never played the original Kirby Air Ride. I never played the original. I'm sure a lot of people didn't, because it was a very niche game. It sold like 1.2 million units on the GameCube. I know the GameCube wasn't exactly a seller of a system, but even still, even by GameCube standards, it didn't sell particularly well. But Kirby Air Ride has always had a cult following, for sure. I've known about it for a long time. Sakurai himself has mentioned it many times in the past, particularly during the Smash 4 era, when he literally made a mode that was basically Smash City Trial in Smash Run, right? And he showed clips and everything, right? So we know that Sakurai has had a soft spot for Air Ride for a long time. So it wasn't exactly a surprise that we got a new one. And it was kind of awkward that like my second Switch 2 game was another racing game. But to be fair, Air Riders is a very different kind of game than Mario Kart is. And what do I think about Air Riders? Well, again, this video is already way too long, so I'm not going to spend too long talking about it, but it's good. I haven't played it in a while. Obviously, I played a lot of it in the weeks it came out, but eventually, again, like Mario Kart, I was like, okay, I think I've had my fill. I'm going to put it down. We'll come back to it when I want to come back to it. Plus, I was waiting on like friends to get it, but thankfully, everyone that I play Switch stuff with has it now. So even though I haven't played it in a while, I'm sure I'll fire it up with Dylan or Jackson at some point again. But it's good. That's really all there is to say about it. It's pretty much everything you could ask for from an Air Riders from an Air Ride sequel. I do have one complaint though. I have one complaint about Air Riders. It doesn't have the original City Trial map. It has all of the OG Air Ride racetracks for just normal Air Ride mode, but they do not have the original City Trial. They have the new one, Skya, which is basically Air Rider's Battlefield. Basically, the sky is very much Battlefield. The sky looks like it could be a Battlefield sky, but you know what I mean, right? That's my only real complaint with it. Other than that, it's a solid game. It's fun. It's honestly kind of a shame that it hasn't sold more than it has. It beat the original. It beat the original, but not by much. As of right now, as of recording, it's not even 2 million units. It's still like 1.8 or something, which I don't know. Like I knew it wasn't gonna sell that much, but like I don't know. I'm not asking for the world here, but like I don't know, like 4, 5 million. I don't know. I thought that it being like the next Sakurai game would push it higher than it did. But for what it's worth, most of the people that actually got Air Ride liked it. It was just, I guess it was too niche of a game, and even the boost of being Sakurai wasn't enough to push it any higher than it really was. So, oh well. But I don't know. It's a fun game. Again, I haven't played it in a while, but I think it's nice to have. It's a nice change. It's a very different kind of racing game. City Trial is fun, but even just the normal races, are definitely different than your normal Mario Kart races. The single player I like. It's obviously no subspace, but it is a fun mode. It also does have cutscenes in it. It actually has more cutscenes than World of Light, funny enough. The final boss is also cool. Although I was spoiled on it because I ended up seeing it in City Trial before I got to play it in the single player. But the single player is solid. It's nothing crazy, obviously, but it's fun. I think the single player. If you haven't played if you have Air Riders and you haven't played the single player, I suggest you play it. I think it's worth playing for sure. It's not super long. I think it's like 5 to 6 hours for at least that initial run through it. But you do have to play through it again to get the true ending, just as a little heads up. But it's fun. I think it's yeah. So the game is solid. The game is solid. Obviously, it not getting DLC is fine because they told us we weren't going to get DLC from the get go. I also don't think it needs DLC. Again, I think the original City Trial map would be cool, but overall, I think the game is fine as is. It's fun, solid. Wish it sold a little more. Alrighty. Now let's move on to the last big game of 2025, and that is, of course, Metroid Prime 4. This, of course, is a very long-awaited title. People have been waiting for this game for the entire generation. It was famously announced way back at E3 2017. People lost their minds, and then it took the entire generation to come out, right? It was delayed in 2019 when they rebooted it under Retro from its previous supposed developer, Bandai Namco. Although Bandai Namco was never confirmed to be the original studio, but it's heavily speculated that they were the original studio before Retro took it back over. And the game finally came out, and the game I didn't play this. Again, this is another game I have not played, so I cannot speak personally to it. The game, generally speaking, got good reviews, but I think that right there, I feel it's kind of in the same boat as Mario Kart, because Mario Kart World, generally speaking, was a liked game. Generally speaking, reviewed well. But I feel like Metroid Prime 4 is in the same boat, because Metroid Prime 4, generally speaking, got good scores, but it definitely has its critics. People talk about the desert area. People talk about the way that some of the levels are structured. And of course, especially before the game came out, people love to meme and talk about Mackenzie. Is that his name? Is that actually his name? Or is that just, I don't know. I think his name was Mackenzie, People memed on him. But, outside of those things, people liked the game overall, And again, the game did not get bad reviews. It didn't. It just wasn't as well received as you would have expected Prime 4 to be. That's essentially the way I look at it. Now, again, I haven't played any of the Metroid Primes. That's a series I do want to play at some point. I do want to get, at the very least, Prime 1 Remastered, because you can get that sucker for, $30 on eBay. I want to at least play that, but I don't know. If I can get into the series, I would like to try 4 at some point, but what I can say, though, is whether you liked Prime 4 or not, and let's make it clear, there are still a lot of people out there that genuinely like Prime 4. But the fact that it wasn't reviewed as well as people would have hoped, combined with the fact that it hasn't sold all that well either. Metroid Dread sold more than Prime 4 did, at least so far, so that's not great for what was supposed to be a big title for the Switch 2, or the original Switch years ago, right? Again, this is a game that was announced for the Switch 1 in its early days, E3 2017, 3 months after the console launched, and it took them until December of 2025, 6 months after its successor launched, for it to come out. But it did come out, and again, while it definitely has its detractors, it definitely has its critics, it was generally reviewed well, and generally liked, but I'll say this, the people that do not like Prime 4 are definitely very vocal about it, Maybe even more so than Mario Kart World. Even Mario Kart World's harshest critics, I don't think are as harsh as like Metroid Prime 4's critics are, at least from what I remember. I don't know. It's been obviously it's been months since the game came out, obviously, but I'm just trying to remember. But I don't know. Again, I haven't played the game myself, so I can't speak to it, and I haven't even played the first 3 games. But I will say it is disappointing that a game that took this long to come out and was this highly anticipated didn't land as much as it should have. I will say, even what regardless of any personal opinion, that I do or do not have, because again, I haven't played the game, so I really can't speak to it myself. But it is what it is. But hey, it has its fans, and hopefully Prime 5, when that inevitably comes out, and hopefully doesn't take another 10 years. Hopefully they will listen to what people did not like about Prime 4, and they will kind of correct themselves, and maybe we'll get a game that's that gets received on the level of the first 3 games again. But I don't know, we'll see. Alrighty then, so let's go ahead and speed run through these last couple of games. Okay, Mario Tennis Fever. This is another Mario Tennis. The Mario sports games have kind of gotten middling reception for the last couple of ones. This one is essentially in the same camp. From the very, very, very little I have seen on it, it's been reviewed better than Aces, and it has a good roster. I know that at the very least. But overall, it's just another Mario Tennis. There's not much to say about it. Pokopia. This game was a really big deal when it came out. It's also a game that very much feels like it should have been on the Switch 1. Like, this game feels like the kind of game that would have gotten a Switch 1 version, and it's not. It's a Switch 2 game, which I guess is probably a good thing, is that gives the Switch to another game that will sell it. And that's the funny thing, is that this game is a system seller. I didn't think it would be. I figured, this will be another game for the lineup, in the same way that like Hyrule Warriors is another game for the lineup, but it's not going to sell consoles. But no, like, this game sold like 4 million units in like the first month or something. Like, for a Pokemon spin-off, that's actually really good, because people like to meme on Pokemon will always sell no matter what. But the thing is, that only applies to the mainline games. The spin-offs don't sell jack compared to, like, the Mario spin-offs sell way more than the Pokemon spin-offs do. Right? Like, Pokken Tournament sold like 2 million copies between Wii U and Switch. Pokemon Mystery Dungeons DX sold like 1 million. Detective Pikachu, the one that came out a few years ago, was probably also like 1 million. Like, most of the ones at least all the console ones sell like 2 million at best. So the fact that Pokopia sold 4 million and counting, and was received unanimously well, everyone that has played it loves it. It's not a game that really interests me personally, but for the audience it targets, it nailed it. Like, it was a solid win for the Switch 2 right there. So that was great for the Switch 2 for sure. And it's done so well that they're even doing bundles with it. There's a bundle in Australia that has Pokopia, and there's also a recent bundle that they've been putting out that's like a pick one type bundle, which they did with the Switch 1 a lot, that has, I believe, Mario Kart World, DK Bonanza, and Pokopia. So, I mean, the fact that they're putting it on the same level as Mario Kart and DK, I think, says something, right? So, whether that game is your cup of tea or not, it was a smash hit, and it is a system seller, at least to some people. So, that's nice. The only problem is that it's a game key card. Now, of course, I mentioned earlier that all the first-party games are proper physical releases. They're not game key cards, with one exception. And the one exception is Pokopia. Now, Pokopia, well, it's a Koei Tecmo game, it's not. There's some leeway there. Right? If this was a Mario game and it was a game key card, I think that would be one thing. But because this is the Pokemon Company and it's Koei Tecmo, it's enough removed from Nintendo proper that, like, I don't think this means anything. Obviously, every game since Pokopia has been a proper physical release. I think Wind and Waves, which we'll get to in a bit, that will be a proper physical release. I think that this is just a one-off. That's my take. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I think that this is just the Pokemon Company being the Pokemon Company and deciding to not splurge on a proper physical release for a spin-off, because again, the console spin-offs historically don't do very well. This is the one exception. So maybe if the game gets a sequel down the line, maybe it will get a proper physical release. But as for Pokopia as it stands, it's the the only Switch 2 exclusive and the only pseudo first party game. It's not. This gets into a whole conversation. Now, of course, I am not going to get into because this could be a whole hour-long discussion in and of itself. But Pokemon is not really first party. It's second party because Nintendo only owns like a third of it, and the Pokemon Company is the one that handles all the publishing, at least in Japan. Like it's a whole other thing. But the point is, Pokopia being a Game Key card sucks, but it doesn't mean anything for the rest of the first party lineup. I don't even think it means anything for the rest of the Pokemon games. I think Wind and Waves, when it comes out next year, is going to be a proper physical release. Now, maybe I'll be proven wrong on that. Hopefully I'm not, but I think this is just a one-off, is my main point. I think this is just a one-off because it's a console spin-off game, and those normally don't sell very well. But it did, so take that for what you will. Next up, we have another game in a similar genre, Tomodachi Life Living the Dream. This game is actually a Switch 1 only title. Now, of course, you can play it on the Switch 2, and there are some minor enhancements if you play it on the Switch 2, but it did not get a Switch 2 version, which is very surprising when Legends ZA and Prime 4 got proper Switch 2 versions, but not this one for some reason. It's just a Switch 1 game through and through. This game also did pretty well with its target audience. Again, it's not a game that's for me, but again, for all the people that were begging for a new Tomodachi Life, they seem to be largely happy with it. I know there are some things, like I know that there's like the online sharing features are not what people want them to be, but generally speaking, the game has done well and it's reviewed well, so not as big of a hit, I would say, as Pokopia was, but still pretty solid. Although it doesn't really do anything for the Switch 2 per se, because again, it's on the Switch 1. However, I believe Nintendo or the Pokemon Company, I forget which one, but one of them said that apparently like 40% of the people that played Tomodachi Life were on Switch 2, even though it's only a Switch 1 game, so take that for what it's worth. But, this game also sold, again, as of now, it's like 4 million. I'm sure it will continue to go up. The first Tomodachi Life sold around 8.5 million on the 3DS, and I think that this new game will probably get, if not literally there, it will get close. It'll probably get to at least 6 million, 6.5 million by the end of its life cycle. But, I would say, considering how long it's been, the game also did pretty well. So that's another win right there, even if it's not for the Switch 2 in particular. Now we come to the future games, the games that are not out yet as of this recording. First up, we have Star Fox. Now, Star Fox was revealed earlier this month, at least as the time I'm recording this on May 29th. So I'm recording this, several days before the anniversary. So it was earlier this month. And this game is, of course, the grand return of Star Fox after 10 years, which is great. And the game visually looks really good. It's our first real Switch 2 showcase game in terms of the graphics. It looks like a PS4, Xbox One caliber game, and that's great to see. It's also continuing the pattern of Star Fox kind of being a technical showcase game, like it was with the Super FX chip on the original, in the original game, for example. Obviously not in the same way, but for the system at least, it's still a showcase, I would say. At least in certain ways. Like the R-Wings look really, really good, for example. The character models also look really good from a detail perspective, at least. But of course, it is a Star Fox 64 remake, so there's that. And of course, the character designs are kind of split. I don't really mind them too much. They're definitely a change, but is what it is, I suppose. If you want to hear me talk more about Star Fox, I did a video with Dylan, aka Green Engineer, over on his channel. You can go watch that. It's about 20 minutes if you want to hear me talk more in depth about Star Fox. But point is, it's coming out, it's a big title, and I haven't talked about this yet, but how earlier I talked about how, the pricing got better later on? Well, starting with I completely forgot about Yoshi. Yoshi just came out recently. But starting with the new Yoshi game that just came out, digital games are now $10 cheaper. So Yoshi is $60 digitally, $70 physically. And this has carried over to every future release. This doesn't apply retroactively, unfortunately, which means that Mario Kart World is still, unfortunately, $80, both physically and digitally. But Yoshi, Star Fox, as well as future titles are all $10 cheaper. And on top of that, certain games are just straight up cheaper now. Like Star Fox and the next game, Splatoon Raiders, are both $60 releases physically with $50 digital. Could you imagine telling people last year? Could you imagine telling people this time last year, hey, we're going to have a new Star Fox, technically, and a new Splatoon next year, and they're going to be $50 on the eShop. They would have called you insane in a world where we just got $80 Mario Kart. But for whatever reason, cooler heads prevailed, and Nintendo, they were like, okay, we tried $80 Mario Kart, that didn't work. We also, the other, okay, we're going to backtrack on that. I mean, now Mario Kart itself is still 80, but but for future releases, we're gonna backtrack on that, right? And we're gonna implement, because Doug Bowser infamously stated variable pricing last year during like the Switch 2 lead up, and people just assumed, like, when people asked about, why is Mario Kart $80, and they're like, oh, variable pricing or whatever, and people kind of just assumed that meant like, oh, if the game is big enough, we can charge more for it. And at the time, that's certainly what that was. But I think that's changed because now, even again, Star Fox, that's a big game. Splatoon, that's a big game. And they're charging only $50 digitally and $60. Like, it's crazy how much they have backtracked on the pricing. Like, it's great. Now, again, what they really need to do now is they need to retroactively apply that to all the previous games. Like, make DK cheaper, make Prime 4 cheaper, make Kirby Air Riders cheaper, and especially make Mario Kart World cheaper. But even just going forward, that's a great win because, man, people obviously have been complaining about, the price of everything for the last couple of years, but it's gotten especially worse this year for certain segments, especially when it comes to electronics, right? We've seen RAM prices skyrocket. We've seen hard drive prices go up, all kinds of stuff, SSD prices go up, especially. And we've seen, soaring prices, and that's, of course, one of the reasons why, and this is a downside, but, of course, the Switch 2, first, PlayStation and Xbox already raised the price of their consoles a couple of times, but Nintendo did raise the price of the Switch 2, or they will be raising the price of the Switch 2 in September, unfortunately. But they are at least doing that pick one bundle as a kind of compromise to be like, yeah, it sucks that the price is going up, but at least we're going to give you something out of it. So at least there's that, I suppose. But but it's nice that it's like, hey, the price of the console is going up, but we're going to give you the pick one bundle, and again, these future games are going to be cheaper. And the fact that and I'm so happy that we're like the age of every first party game has to be full price no matter what. I'm glad that era is finally over because that was a big problem with the Switch 1. Like granted, I know Mario Tennis Fever is still $70, but just the fact that the Mario sports games and these smaller titles were full price when they really shouldn't have been, The fact that we're seemingly moving past that, Rhythm Heaven is $40, both physically and digitally, again, Yoshi is 60, 70, Star Fox and Splatoon are surprisingly enough 50, 60, which is absolutely shocking. I would have been okay with 60, 70, but they went 50, 60. It's like, oh, okay. I was like, okay. Fire Emblem, obviously, I'm sure that will be 60, 70 and all that. So it's great that they have seemingly not only learned their lesson on the $80, but they're going even further, and they're overcorrecting in a way, and they're really improving the price. And obviously, is every game going to be $50? No, right? Obviously, not every game is going to be 50, 60. But the fact that we're getting games that are 50, 60, and they're again, if Mario Tennis was 50, 60, that wouldn't mean too much. But the fact that Star Fox is 50, 60, the fact that Splatoon is 50, 60 is crazy. But it is, and it's amazing. And it's man, it's just so nice to have a nice, solid W. We need more of those. We need nice, solid W's that have no asterisks attached to them. Just something that everyone unanimously can be like, yeah, that's awesome. It's a shame that it took $80 Mario Kart to get there. I know I'm harping a lot on. I know it's not just $80. I know the economy. I know all that other stuff is a big factor of it too. But the $80 Mario Kart thing went down like a lead balloon so hard, so fast, and I think that really tainted the pricing of the Switch 2 overall, even if it was just that one game that was $80. So the fact that we're not only, because I think $80 that might be dead. Before this whole pricing restructuring thing, I assumed that Everything else will be 70, right? You know, all your normal games will be 70, but your big hitters will be 80, right? You know, 3D Zelda will be 80. Mario, the 3D Mario, I was kind of iffy on whether or not it'd be 80 or not, but Smash will be 80, right? And now I'm like, I think Smash might be 70, right? It's not going to be 60, but I think it might be 70. It might not be 80 anymore. Like, that's crazy. That we've reached, like, that's how much things have changed over the course of 1 year, you know? See, I'm very, very happy that the pricing has improved by that much, I know that might not be much considering the price of, again, I know everyone complains about the pricing for everything right now. It's not just gaming, it's not just technology, it's all kinds of stuff. But it's nice that we have a silver lining of, yes, dynamic pricing that goes down and not just up. And also, it does it for some of the big games. Again, I don't think they're all going to be like that, but again, the fact that we're getting Star Fox and Splatoon, these big series, Splatoon definitely is a big series. Star Fox, it's more of a legacy series than a big series, but still, the fact that we're getting these two IPs, these two kind of relatively big IPs, and they're only $50 digitally and 60 physically, in a world where just last year we had Mario Kart for 80, no matter what format you bought it on. It's just it's just very nice. Again, I'm harping on this a lot, but it really is such a big win for the Switch 2, right? And that's one of the reasons why I say that, yes, in the pre-launch period and immediately after, the Switch 2's reputation was kind of rough, but I think they really have righted the ship. They've had a couple of really solid releases, and also they've slowly been addressing some of the big pain points of the Switch 2. Again, they've improved the pricing on the games, at least. Now, again, the console price has gone up, but that's kind of out of their control because of the whole RAM and everything. But the game pricing has improved a lot, and that's great. We also, again, have some big titles. Again, Star Fox is coming out next month. We're going to have Splatoon the month after that. We're also going to have Rhythm Heaven. We're going to have Fire Emblem coming out. And then also, almost assuredly, because of Star Fox, Ocarina of Time is all but a guarantee at this point. So, yeah, things are looking up. I think things really are looking up for the Switch 2. Again, that initial kind of like April to like June 2025 period of like, game key cards, $80 Mario, like all of that was a real kind of dog on the system. But I really think that in the last few months especially, they really have turned things around, right? The console's doing well. The console, as of recording, officially is at like 20 million-ish, but that's as of March 31st. That's like as of the last quarterly earnings, so that's not 100% the up-to-date number, but it's doing well. It's already obviously long beat the Wii U at 13 million. It's been now a year, and it's at 20 million. It's still outpacing the Switch 1, I believe, in sales, like for like that same time period. But in like 2018 or whatever. Now, obviously, that's not going to last forever. As I said way earlier on in the discussion, the Switch 2 is not going to come anywhere near the Switch 1 sales wise overall, but it is going to still do well, in my opinion. And I've said this before on streams and other stuff, but I'm going to reiterate it. I think the Switch 2 is going to be the 3DS is going to be the 3DS. And in some ways, it has honestly a lot in common. Think about it, right? The 3DS, when it first came out, had a high price tag, and then eventually they lowered the price tag, and they got more games out the door, and then it started to do well. Whereas the Switch 2 had some big games when it came out, but it also had a lot of asterisks. Again, the game key cards are still a thing. I'm not saying the game key cards are going anywhere, but the game key card situation is going to improve because I believe there is 16 and 32 gig carts on the way, so that should improve the game key card situation, at least to some extent. And again, the pricing for the first party games is a lot better now. So, I think it's all going to work out, I was never one of those people that was like, the Switch 2 is going to fail. Like, no, of course it's not going to fail. It's going to do fine. The real question is, how fine is it going to do? And again, I think the Switch 2, when it's all said and done, in like 2032, 2033, when it finally gets replaced by whatever the next system is, it's probably going to be at like 80, 85 million. maybe 90, but it will not hit 100. And if it does hit 100, it's not going to get past that, right? It's not going to come anywhere near the 155 million because the Switch 1 was it was the first handheld hybrid of its type. This is before the Steam Deck, before the ROG Ally, before all these PC handhelds. It was the only handheld at the time. It was the only one that had the docked and portable and hand. Like it was the only one at that time. It was kind of the pioneer of this kind of category of handheld, right? And also it had the pandemic, during that middle portion with Animal Crossing especially, that also helped it. Again, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Switch 1 was already a big success before the pandemic, but the pandemic definitely helped it a lot to push it like far and above what they probably would have ever expected. So we're not going to have any of that now, but it's still going to do well. Again, we have a consistent lineup of games, which again, as I mentioned way earlier on in this discussion, 2018, while it had Smash, didn't have much else. This year is way more consistent. There's a lot more variety. There's a lot more games. Again, there's a game like every month or so. And not just smaller titles, but like some bigger ones. Again, Star Fox and Splatoon and Fire Emblem and again, Ocarina of Time basically all but confirmed. Like we have these several big releases for just this year. Yes, we're still waiting on 3D Mario. Yes, we're still waiting on Smash. Yes, we're still waiting on some of those other really, really big ones, but they're going to come. In the meantime, we're still going to have some solid releases. So, yeah. And now we've reached, and then for 2027, the only thing we know for 2027 is Wind and Waves, which Wind and Waves, I have not done a video on Wind and Waves. However, what I will say for Wind and Waves, for those of you that didn't see, that haven't heard me talk about it already in a stream or whatever, Wind and Waves looks promising. It looks like, the game that's finally going to get Pokemon out of the dark era, so to speak, that the Switch kind of put them in, especially with Scarlet and Violet, which is definitely the low point of the series from at least a critical and public perception standpoint. Whether you liked Scarlet and Violet or not, I didn't play the game myself, so I can't speak to it personally, but obviously in terms of reception and just online discourse. I mean, Scarlet and Violet makes Sword and Shield look like nothing, right? Like Sword and Shield looks like a masterpiece from a discourse perspective by comparison. That's how far down the discourse for Scarlet and Violet kind of was. But this game looks promising, It's not pushing anything crazy for the graphics, but the graphics are finally at a point where they look good enough. Like we're finally at Breath of the Wild tier visuals at the very least, And the water looks pretty good. Again, we've seen very little of it, but from that first trailer, it looks promising, and I'm very, very glad that they're not coming out this year. I'm very, very glad that the Pokemon Company is letting Game Freak cook. Let them, memes aside, actually let them cook, seriously. This game, I might actually get this game, right? I got Sword and Shield just because, and I thought Sword and Shield was fine for what it was worth, but I didn't play Legends Arceus, I didn't play Scarlet and Violet, and I didn't play, ZA, but this one I might actually get. Well, I might actually get this one. I think there's a chance I will. And obviously that's going to be a big title for the system. That's going to sell a lot of consoles, but that's not coming out until next year. So we have to wait a little for that. But I think it's going to be worth it. If there's one series that needs all the time it can get in the oven, it's Pokemon. So, and it shows because this game looks like a big jump over the previous ones. And if you don't think it's a big jump, you need to go back and see Scarlet and Violet again. You go watch that Wind and Waves trailer, and then you go back and look at Scarlet and Violet, and you're going to be like, oh my god, it looks so much better. Again, it's nothing crazy, but it's so much better looking than Scarlet and Violet. Now, it still doesn't have cell shading. That's say what you will about Sword and Shield, but Sword and Shield had a pretty good art style. Yes, it had its flaws in the graphics department, the Ocarina of Time trees, the wild area, whatever, but the art style it nailed. It doesn't have that art style, but overall graphically, it's a big improvement. So, that's gonna be a good thing to look forward to. I think that might be the first Pokemon game in a long time that people are gonna actually be genuinely excited for, outside of the main fan base. So that'll definitely be nice. And obviously, we'll get 3D Mario next year. There's no way it's not gonna be next year. They gotta have that sucker out definitely next year because it's not gonna be this year at this point. So next year for sure. And of course, as for the golden goose for me, Smash, well, Kirby Air Riders existing at all. I think it's great that we have Kirby Air Riders, but it does come at the cost of now we gotta wait longer for Smash. And I don't think we're going to get a Switch 2 edition at this point. I think that ship has sailed. I think if they were going to do it, they would have done it already. So I think at this point, honestly, I think we're going to have to wait till 2028. I think it's going to be 2028. But that's a whole other video for another time. And finally, I think we're at the end here. I mean, 2 hours and 3 minutes. This is the longest discussion video I've done in a long time. Like a long time. I've never had one this long before, and if I haven't had one since like 2017. Like, oh man, this is a long one. So thank you for those of you that have stuck through and haven't clicked off at some point. Thank you for those of you that have stuck around through this whole 2-hour ramble fest. Hopefully it was entertaining despite all the tangents and everything, but yeah. So, yeah, the Switch 2 had a bit of a rocky start, but they're turning things around and it's looking pretty good. It's going to be a while till we get something like Smash, but we have a solid lineup right now. We got Ocarina of Time to look forward to later this year. We got Splatoon. Of course, I'm going to be getting Splatoon. I'll be getting Splatoon Raiders when that comes out on day one. Will I stream? Will I do a stream for it? I don't know. We'll see how I feel about it. Because I did a stream for Side Order when that came out, but I ended up kind of not streaming the rest of it. I only did that initial stream. I don't know. Maybe I'll stream some Splatoon Raiders. Maybe I won't. It's not really a big enough game that I need to stream it or anything, but we'll see. But I'm going to be getting that day one for sure, as I have with all the previous Splatoon games. Even if it's not, Splatoon 4, I still want to play it, obviously. Obviously, when Ocarina of Time comes out, and I say when it comes out, because at this point, it basically is assured at this point, thanks to Nate the Hate being right on Star Fox. I'll obviously be getting that the second it launches. I'm probably not going to stream that one because I already streamed Ocarina of Time a few years ago on Twitch, which unfortunately I don't have the VODs for anymore. But I don't know. I think Ocarina of Time is too big of a deal for me to want to stream it. I think that's one where I'm going to want to play it on my own and get to experience it. Because Ocarina of Time is, and again, I know, shocker, this is the most like milquetoast take ever, but Ocarina of Time is my favorite. I'm sorry, I don't care how vanilla that is. It's just true. It's my favorite. I'm not saying it's definitively the best one, but it is my favorite. It's Ocarina of Time. I mean, what do you want me to say? It's the first Zelda game I played on the Virtual Console back in the day. It's my favorite one. What do you want me to say? So I'm going to say right now I probably won't stream it, but we'll see when the time comes. We're still obviously months away from that game coming out, or even being announced potentially. Well, no, the game's going to be announced in June Direct. They can't wait till September to announce it. But yeah, so again, thank you all for listening. And yeah, I guess with that being said, this is Logan59XP, and I'll see you guys next time.